A gold-tipped pen rested on a document. One line was highlighted in yellow, the yellow of something that required attention, and had been given it the yellow of a line that could not be moved past until it was addressed. The line read, "Co-owner, signature, required." Below it on the line provided a name, Miriam Holt. In the corridor of Meadowview Nursing Facility, a man in a business suit walked quickly with his phone in his hand, and the expression of a man who has somewhere to be and is calculating the time it will take to get there and leave. He stopped at the door, marked 14B. He looked at the number on the door. He looked at his phone. He looked at the door again. He had not been here before. You could tell from the way he stood in front of it the slight hesitation of a person encountering a threshold they have not crossed before and are working out the protocol of crossing. 18 months. That was how long it had been since Callum Holt had seen his mother. He had brought her to Meadowview in March of 2020, had signed the intake forms at the front desk. With the efficiency of a man completing a necessary administrative process, had carried 2 bags to room 14B and set them on the bed and said he would visit soon and had driven away. He had a company to build. He had not looked back. Inside room 14. Miriam was in the chair by the window with a book open in her lap. The afternoon light came through the window at the angle it came through. At this hour, the particular light of a room that faced west. And it fell across the book and across her hands and across the silver of her hair in the way of light that has been falling across the same person in the same chair at the same hour for long enough that it has found its angle. The door opened. Miriam did not look up. Callum stepped inside. He said, "Mom, we need to talk." Miriam turned a page. The page turned with the deliberate motion of someone who is finishing a sentence before they do anything else. The motion of a woman who has been reading carefully for 78 years and does not interrupt herself for interruptions that can wait. And this one had waited 18 months and could wait the additional moment it took to finish the sentence. She closed the book. She looked at him. She looked at him with the expression she had been preparing for 18 months of monthly letters from Gerald Oates's office, 18 months of opening envelopes and reading the updates and folding the papers and placing them in the green tin under the bed. The expression of a woman who knows exactly why someone has come and has known it was coming and is entirely ready for it. She said, "I know why you're here, Callum." She said, "Sit down." She paused. She said, "And don't touch the box." Under the bed, just visible at the edge of the bedskirt, the green tin sat in the dark, the way it had sat for 18 months, patient and full and waiting for the moment when it would be needed. That moment was now. Miriam was dressed when the breakfast cart arrived at 7:15. This was not unusual. She was always dressed when the breakfast cart arrived, had been dressed and reading for 40 minutes by then, which a days had noted in the particular way she noted things about residents she respected, which was without comment and with the quiet filing of information that shaped how she understood a person. 14 months of mornings had given a days a thorough understanding of Miriam Holt's routine, which operated with the precision of something that had been designed rather than accumulated, each element of the morning in its correct sequence, the dressing and the reading and the breakfast and the window and the book. Miriam ate efficiently, not without pleasure, but without the performance of pleasure that some residents adopted in the dining room, the commentary on the food, or the comparisons to how things used to be made. She ate what was on the tray with the attention of someone who understood that the body required fuel and that the fuel's provenance was less important than its adequacy. And when she finished, she returned the tray to the cart and settled into the chair by the window with her book. Room 14. B was small in the way of rooms that had been designed for function rather than comfort, and that a certain kind of person made comfortable through the precision of what they chose to put in them. The bed was made with the tightness of someone who had made beds the same way for 50 years. The nightstand held 2 things: the reading glasses she wore in the mornings and the photograph of Bernard at the fishing pier, 1987. Bernard squinting into the sun with the particular expression of a man who is happy, in a way he is not performing for the camera. Not Callum's photograph, Bernard's. Under the bed, visible at the edge of the bed skirt to anyone who looked at the right angle at the right moment, The green tin box sat in the shadow of the frame. It was the kind of tin that had once held something else, something domestic, and had been repurposed with the practicality of a woman who used what was available rather than acquiring what was decorative. It sat there in the first 90 seconds of the morning the way it sat there every morning, present and unaddressed, part of the room's furniture, in the way of things that have been in the same place long enough to become part of the architecture. Adai's arrived with the morning mail at 8:30. One envelope. Cream-colored the return address in the upper left corner, the address that had appeared on cream envelopes every month for 18 months, Gerald Oates, attorney at law. Miriam accepted it with both hands the way she had accepted every one of them with the care of someone receiving something they have been expecting and intend to read properly. She opened it at the window. She read it in the methodical way she read everything from the beginning, and without skipping the way a person reads who spent 30 years as a chief accountant and never signed anything she had not read completely. When she finished, she folded it along its existing creases and slid it into the pocket of her cardigan. Beatrice looked over from her bed. Beatrice was 76 and had been in room 14B for 14 months alongside Miriam, and had developed over that time the understanding of her roommate that comes from proximity and attention, the understanding of a woman who knew when another woman was keeping something important. She said another one from the lawyer. Miriam said monthly update. Beatrice said about what? Miriam turned a page. She said business. Beatrice looked at her for a moment. Then she looked at her own book. The conversation was finished in the way that Miriam finished conversations she had completed, which was simply by continuing to do the next thing. In the common room at 9, Miriam did the morning exercises with the group, the chair stretches, and the range of motion movements that the facility's physical therapist led on weekdays. She did them precisely and without complaint and without the manufactured cheerfulness that some residents used as a social currency in these sessions. She was maintaining something which was different from performing it. Adais passed her in the hallway afterward. Miriam said, "Did he?" It was not a question. It had the quality of a woman receiving information she had been anticipating and confirming its arrival, the tone of someone checking a predicted event against the calendar in their mind. She turned the page. Adais said gently, "He's coming to visit Mrs. Holt." "That must be nice." Miriam said he's coming because he needs something a days. Men like Callum don't visit, they arrive. Adais looked at her for a moment. Then she continued down the hallway with the cart, carrying with her the information and the comment and the 14 months of mornings that had given her the context to understand the difference between the two things Miriam had just named. That evening after dinner, Miriam sat on the edge of her bed. She reached under the bed. Miriam was looking at Bernard's photograph when the flashback came. She had been looking at it for a few minutes the way she sometimes looked at it in the evenings when the light changed and the room had the quality of ending rather than beginning, and the photograph was Bernard at the pier in 1987, with his eyes squinting against the sun, and the expression she had loved most on him, the expression of a man who was happy in a way he had not arranged for anyone's benefit. She needed to trace the sequence, not because she had forgotten it, because the correct order of events was a thing she had always believed in keeping accurate, the way she had kept the accounts accurate for 30 years, the way she had kept her own accounting of this situation accurate for 18 months. The sequence mattered. She went through it. January 2020. Callum and Priya had come to the house on a Sunday afternoon, which was a day Callum rarely came to the house, and they had come with the particular quality of people who have planned what they are going to say before they arrive, the quality of a visit that is a presentation. The brochure for Meadowview was in Priya's bag. She took it out after the tea was poured, which was when Miriam understood that the tea had been a preliminary, a softening before the main agenda. The brochure was good quality, the kind designed to suggest permanence and comfort simultaneously, and Priya had highlighted the amenities page with a yellow marker that had also been prepared in advance, the highlighting done at home, before the visit to indicate the items most relevant to Miriam's comfort. Miriam had listened to the presentation. When they finished, she had asked 3 questions. Who managed the medical decisions in cases where she was incapacitated? What the exit clause was if she chose to leave, and looking at Callum directly, who pays for it. Callum had said, "We'll work it out from the trust." Miriam had noted the phrasing, "We'll work it out from the trust." She had not corrected it. She had filed it. She went back further. 2017. Callum had come to the house in September of 2017 with a folder of papers and the energy of a man in the middle of something significant who needed one more thing to complete it. He had explained the structure of Redstone Holdings and the capital requirement and the opportunity, and he had used the phrase "just a formality" when he set the papers in front of her, the phrase that people used when they wanted something signed quickly and had decided in advance that the details were not the important part. Miriam had picked up the papers. She had put on her reading glasses. She had read every page. She read with the attention she had given to contracts for 30 years, the margin note attention of a chief accountant who understood that the difference between a thing that protected you and a thing that exposed you was almost always in the language of the subordinate clauses and the definition sections that most people skipped because they were difficult to read and seemed not to be the main point. She had called Gerald the next morning. Gerald had called her back at 9:15. He had said, "You'll be a 40% co-owner, Miriam. You understand that." She had said, "I know, Gerald. I read it." He had been quiet for a moment. Then he had said, "Most people don't." She had said, "Most people aren't former chief accountants." She had signed the contract. She had signed it with the gold-tipped pen Bernard had given her in 1989 for their anniversary, the pen she used for documents that mattered, the pen that was her marker of the difference between something routine and something that required the full weight of her intention. Back to 2020. The intake forms for Meadowview had been on the desk at the facility's front office, the administrative surface of an institution that processed transitions regularly and had developed efficient systems for doing so. Callum had filled in the fields quickly, primary contact and emergency contact and billing authorization, his handwriting moving across the pages with the speed of a man who had already decided everything and was completing the formality. Miriam had signed where indicated. She had not made a production of reading the intake forms because intake forms for a residence were not the same category as contracts for equity ownership, and because she had already understood the relevant terms of her situation and did not need to perform her understanding for Callum's benefit. On the drive to Meadowview, she had made one phone call. She had called Gerald. She had said, "Callum is moving me to Meadowview. I'd like you to send the monthly shareholder summary to my new address, please, starting with the next one." Gerald had said, of course. He had paused. "And Miriam, you know what that summary will contain. When Redstone reaches certain valuation points, there are provisions that activate. You know what those provisions require." Miriam had said, "That's exactly why I want it." She had given him the Meadowview address. The day of intake, Callum had carried her 2 bags to room 14B with the efficiency of a son who was being kind in a distracted way, the kindness of a person who is present in the room, but whose attention is elsewhere. He had arranged the bags on the bed. He had said the room was very nice. He had said he would call on Sunday. He had hugged her at the door. She had watched him walk down the corridor with the walk of a man who had completed something and was moving to the next item. She had unpacked her room. Bernard's photograph first. Her books in the order she had organized them. The cardigan on the hook. And from the bottom of the second bag, the green tin. She had bought it the week before, cleaned it, confirmed its dimensions against the size of the envelopes she was expecting. She had known what it would be used for. She had slid it under the bed in the position she had decided on, and had stood and straightened and looked at the room. Present. She looked at Bernard's photograph. She said he was not a bad boy, Bernard. She said it the way she said true things about people she loved, with the accuracy that love required, rather than the softening that sentiment preferred. She said he just grew into a man who stopped reading things before he signed them. She paused. She said, "I tried to teach him. He must have been absent that day." The common room on Tuesday afternoons had the quality of a space that had found its purpose in the small rituals of the people who used it, the card tables and the afternoon light, and the particular unhurried pace of a weekday afternoon, in a place where the schedule was loose enough to accommodate what people actually needed, rather than what the schedule required. Miriam and Beatrice had been playing cards on Tuesday afternoons for 11 months. Beatrice had moved into room 14B in the third week of Miriam's 5th month at Meadowview, and Miriam had spent 3 weeks in quiet observation before deciding that Beatrice was worth knowing, which was how Miriam approached most things that required commitment with the patience of someone who understood that the assessment period was as important as the decision. What had decided it was the losing. Beatrice was, by her own cheerful acknowledgment, a terrible card player. She lost consistently and graciously without the commentary some people deployed around losing without the revisions of memory that turned their losses into near wins in the retelling. She simply lost and shuffled the cards and dealt again, which Miriam had assessed as a quality of character worth having in close proximity. They played in the particular, comfortable silence of two women who had been in each other's company long enough that silence had become a form of communication rather than an absence of it. Beatrice played a card. She said, "Your son still hasn't come." Miriam played a card. She said, "No." Beatrice said, "Does that?" Miriam said it did for the first 4 months. Now it's just a fact. She said it the way she said things that had been processed and filed, with the tone of a fact that had been examined and categorized, and was no longer in the active part of her emotional inventory. The pain of it was not gone. It had simply been moved to the correct drawer, the drawer that held things that were true and not changeable, and that she visited with the same regularity she visited Bernard's photograph on her own schedule and for her own purposes. The letters. She did not describe them to Beatrice. She described them to herself in the quiet interior narration that had accompanied the reading of each one, the monthly arrival from Gerald Oates that she had been receiving since the first month at Meadowview, the letter she had requested from the back seat of Callum's car on the drive over. The first month's summary had been straightforward. Redstone Holdings, current revenue, current valuation, operational update. She had read it in the chair by the window and had understood the numbers the way she had understood numbers her entire professional life, which was completely and without the translation that most people required. The second month. The third. Each one a chapter of the same book, the book of a company built on $400,000 from Miriam's trust, growing in the direction that Gerald had explained it would grow if the market held and the management was adequate. Month 6. The valuation had crossed $2 million. Month 8 had been different. Month 8 had contained a note from Gerald below the standard summary, a paragraph in addition to the numbers. An acquisition inquiry had been received. Preliminary figure $6.2 million. Gerald would keep her informed. Miriam had set that letter aside from the others. She had read it twice. She had stood at the window for a long time afterward, looking at the parking lot below the parking lot that was the same parking lot Callum had driven out of without looking in the rearview mirror, and she had done the arithmetic that the letter required, the arithmetic of a 40% co-owner's position in a company valued at $6.2 million, and then she had put the letter in the tin with the others and pressed the lid closed and gone to breakfast. Month 10. Month 12. The valuation climbing with each summary, the acquisition interest intensifying in the language Gerald used, which was careful language but which Miriam had read enough legal correspondence to decode accurately. Month 14 had arrived on a Wednesday. She had read it standing up by the window before Beatrice woke in the particular early morning stillness of the room when the light was just coming in and the facility had not yet reached its operational pace. The acquisition offer had been formalized at $9 million. The buyer had conducted due diligence. Gerald's note was brief and specific, the note of a man who had been waiting for a specific event and was now reporting its arrival. Transaction cannot proceed without co-owner signature. I expect Callum will contact you shortly. She had read it once. She had stood at the window for a long time. The parking lot was the same parking lot. The light came in at the same angle. The facility was waking up around her in the same sequence it woke up every morning, the distant sounds of the breakfast preparation and the first movement in the corridor. She had put the letter in the tin. She had pressed the lid closed with both hands. She had looked at the window. Back in the common room, Beatrice was watching her. "Miriam said he's coming this week," Beatrice said finally. "Miriam said he needs a signature." Beatrice set her cards down. She looked at her friend, at the woman who had been sitting across from her at this table for 11 months, who had beaten her at cards consistently and graciously, and who had been receiving monthly letters from a lawyer for 18 months, and had said nothing about them to anyone except the minimum, the word business, and who was now sitting with the deck in her hands with the expression of a woman who has been holding something for a long time and is approaching the moment of decision. Beatrice said, "And are you going to give it to him?" Miriam picked up the deck. She shuffled it with the practiced motion of someone who had shuffled cards many times, the cards moving through her fingers with the clean sound of something being rearranged. She said, "I haven't decided yet. $9 million. And the only thing standing between Callum Holt and the completion of the largest transaction of his professional life was a woman in room 14B who had been reading the shareholder summaries every month for 18 months and had not yet decided what she wanted to do about any of it." Callum's car pulled into the Meadowview parking lot at 2 o'clock on Thursday afternoon. He sat in it for a moment after he turned off the engine, which was a thing he had not anticipated doing, but which happened anyway. The particular pause of a man who has prepared for something and has arrived at the threshold of it, and needs an additional moment before the preparation becomes action. He checked his phone. He straightened his jacket. He looked at the building. He got out of the car. The front desk was staffed by a woman in her 40s who had the professional warmth of someone who spent her days managing the gap between institutional efficiency and human feeling and had found a way to do both. She smiled when Callum approached and asked how she could help, and he said, "Room 14B, my mother, Miriam Holt," and she said, "Of course, Mr. Holt," and began filling in the visitor badge. She said, "She's expecting you." Callum looked up from the form he was signing. The receptionist was already printing the badge, her attention on the printer, and the words sat in the air of the lobby with the particular weight of information that carries more than its surface meaning. "She's expecting you." Not, "She'll be happy to see you." Not, "She's in her room." Not, "She's available." Expecting you. He put the badge on his jacket. He walked toward the corridor. The hallway of Meadowview had the institutional quality of all hallways, designed for the long-term accommodation of people who would spend significant time in them, the proportions and the lighting and the surfaces calculated for practical durability rather than aesthetic comfort. Callum walked through it with the particular speed of a man for whom this environment produced a discomfort he would not have named aloud if asked, the discomfort of a place that made concrete a set of facts about time and dependency that he preferred to keep abstract. He passed the common room. Through the door he could see residents at tables, the Tuesday afternoon card game that had ended and been replaced with something else, the ordinary afternoon activity of people who had arranged their lives within the dimensions available to them. He walked faster. "Room 14B." He knocked. He opened the door. Miriam was in the chair by the window with a book, the same position she occupied for a significant portion of each day, the position of a woman who had found the correct relationship between herself and the available light and was using it. She did not look up immediately. She was in the middle of a paragraph, and she was the kind of reader who finished what she was reading before she did anything else. She closed the book. She looked at him. He said, "Mom?" She said, "Callum." She gestured to the chair beside the window, the chair that was positioned slightly across from her own, the arrangement of two chairs in a room that had been set up for conversation rather than parallel occupation. He sat. He looked at the room with the involuntary assessment of a man whose professional life involved spaces, and their valuation and the smallness of it arrived on his face, in the way of information received and processed before it could be controlled, a brief registering of the dimensions against some standard he was carrying, and then it was gone, controlled, replaced with the expression he had brought for this visit. He asked how she was. She told him. She told him about her health in the specific terms of a woman who monitored it accurately, the blood pressure and the sleep and the knee, that had improved since the physical therapist adjusted the exercise protocol. She told him about her routine, the morning reading and the Tuesday card games and the Thursday afternoon group that she found tolerable rather than enjoyable, but that she attended because tolerable and regular was better than the alternative. She mentioned Adaz by name and Beatrice by name. She did not ask about his life. He noticed this. He opened his portfolio on the small table between the two chairs. The documents were organized in the order he had organized them: the executive summary and the acquisition terms, and the signature page with the highlighted line. He had arranged them for a presentation, the presentation of a situation to a person who would need it explained. He said, "Mom, I need to explain what's happening with Redstone." He said, "There's a significant opportunity, and I need to walk you through the structure because your signature is technically required as part of the documentation, and I want to make sure you understand what you're signing." Miriam said the $9 million offer from Vantage Capital. Callum stopped. He looked at her. She was looking at him with the expression she had been wearing since he came, in the expression of complete and composed attention, the expression of someone who has been waiting for a specific thing to arrive and is watching it arrive. He said, "How do you—" Miriam said, "Gerald sends me the monthly shareholder summaries." She said it the way she said facts plainly, and without emphasis that suggested she was making a point. She said, "As co-owner, I'm entitled to them. I've been receiving them since March 2020. The room was quiet. The particular quiet of a room that has received information requiring the rearrangement of its furniture, the quiet of a conversation that has had its premise removed. Callum looked at the portfolio on the table. He looked at his mother. He looked at the portfolio again. Miriam reached under the bed. She brought out the green tin which she set on the table beside the acquisition documents, the two objects side by side, the documents of Callum's presentation, and the tin that had been under the bed since the first week at Meadowview. She opened the lid. 18 letters each in its cream envelope, each dated in the upper right corner in the way of Gerald's correspondence, each one opened and folded and replaced with the precision of a woman who organized things the way she had organized accounts for 30 years. She fanned them slightly across the table, the way a card player reveals a hand, not with drama, but with the simple gesture of showing what she held. Callum looked at the letters. "He said you knew." His voice had lost the prepared quality it had carried since the parking lot. "He said this whole time, you knew." Miriam said, "I'm a co-owner, Callum. Knowing is part of the position." "He said I didn't think you'd—" He stopped. She said, "Read it, I know." She said it without sharpness, as an accurate description of his assumption. She said, "That's a habit you'll want to reconsider." He looked at the letters on the table. 18 months of monthly updates read by the window of the room he had put her in, and not returned to each one folded and dated and preserved in a green tin under a bed he had never thought to ask about. He had come to explain the situation to his mother. His mother had been tracking it for 18 months. She looked at him across the tin and the letters and the acquisition documents with the expression of a woman who had been a chief accountant for 30 years and had read a contract before she signed it, and had been sitting in room 14B, doing what co-owners were entitled to do, which was know what was happening with the company they co-owned. She said, "Shall we discuss it properly?" Miriam put on her reading glasses. She picked up the top document from Callum's portfolio, the deal summary, and she began to read it with the attention she brought to all financial documents, which was the attention of a woman who had spent 30 years understanding that the difference between a document that protected you and a document that exposed you was almost always in the language that most people skipped because it seemed like detail rather than substance. Callum watched her read. He had not seen her read a contract before. This was not because she never had. It was because he had never been in the room when she did, had never been present for the part of her life that happened at desks and in offices and at kitchen tables with reading glasses on and a pencil making margin notes, the part of her life that had operated continuously for 30 years before he was born and for 30 years after, and that he had simply never placed himself in proximity to. The precision of it silenced him. She read without moving, without the small sounds people made when they were processing something, the shim or the ah or the small exhalations of comprehension. She simply read, moving through the document with the pace of someone who reads this kind of language fluently and requires no time to translate it. She turned the page. She read the next. She found the co-owner signature line. She studied it with the additional attention she gave to specific provisions, the slight forward lean of someone looking more carefully at a particular passage. She said, "This is correctly drawn." Gerald's work. Callum said the buyer's lawyers. Miriam said they did it correctly. She set the document down and placed it to one side with the precision of a woman organizing a desk. She picked up the first letter from the tin. January 2020. She read the revenue figure from it aloud, the number that represented Redstone Holdings' position at the beginning of the period, the baseline from which everything that followed had grown. She set that letter down. She picked up the letter from month 8. She read aloud the line about the acquisition inquiry, the preliminary figure of $6.2 million, Gerald's note that he would keep her informed. She set that letter down. She picked up the letter from month 14. She read the formalization of the offer, the $9 million, the note about due diligence, completed the sentence about the transaction not being able to proceed without co-owner signature. She set that letter down. She had not editorialized. She had read the numbers in sequence, each one placed in the air of the room, and left there the financial record of 18 months read aloud like an accountant closing a ledger at the end of a reporting period. The figures that were simply the figures requiring no commentary because the sequence itself was the commentary. The room was quiet with what had been said. Callum said, "Mom, I know how this looks." Miriam said, "How does it look?" He said, "Like I put you here and forgot about you." Miriam set down the letter she had been holding. She said, "Did you—" She said it without inflection that suggested she already knew the answer as a genuine question about an honest accounting. She said, "Callum, I'm not asking for an argument. I'm asking you to answer the question honestly." He looked at the letters on the table. He said, "I told myself you were being looked after, that you were comfortable." Miriam said, "I am comfortable." She said it without contradiction as a fact. She said that was never the question. She reached to the nightstand and picked up Bernard's photograph. She did not show it to Callum. She held it in both hands in the way she held things that anchored her, the way she had held the letters when she read them each month by the window, the way she held the gold pen when she signed documents that mattered. She said the question is whether comfortable was meant as a description or a substitute. Callum looked at her. She said a description of a state, or a substitute for a presence. They are not the same thing, and they do not feel the same from inside them. He said, "I thought." She said, "I know what you thought." She set the photograph back on the nightstand. Bernard returned to his position at the fishing pier. She said, "Your father taught me to read everything I sign. He had a saying that I have used every year since he died, which is that a signature means you were present, truly present, for what you agreed to." She looked at Callum directly. She said, "When you signed the intake forms here in March 2020, were you present?" She said it without the sharp delivery of someone making an accusation, with the plain delivery of someone asking a question that has a specific answer she is waiting to hear. Callum did not have an answer. The silence in the room had the quality of a silence that contains an answer that has not been spoken. She said, "And when I signed the Redstone contract in 2017, I read it. I had Gerald confirm it. I understood what I was signing, and I signed it with full attention." She paused. "That is the difference between us in this conversation, Callum. Not the law, not the structure. That." She reached to the small table beside the green tin. The gold pen was there. She had placed it there before he arrived, as she placed it whenever she was going to sign something in the position that Bernard had shown her the pen positioned, so that the act of picking it up was deliberate rather than automatic. She picked it up. She held it in both hands. She did not uncap it. She did not move it toward the document. She simply held it, Bernard's pen, the pen he had given her in 1989, with the inscription on the barrel that said to Miriam, who always reads before she signs. She said, "I want to tell you what I've decided, but first I need you to understand something about what you're asking me to sign." And she began. She explained the structure of the deal the way she would have explained any deal she had analyzed for 30 years, from the foundational terms outward, each layer, building on the previous one, the acquisition terms and the co-owner provisions, and the distribution calculations, and what 40% of $9 million represented as a legal and financial reality. Callum listened. He listened the way a person listens when they have stopped calculating the outcome of the conversation and have started simply being in the conversation when the performance of preparation has been replaced by the actual receiving of information. She explained his company to him. She explained it with the precision of someone who had been reading the monthly summaries for 18 months and had been a co-owner for 4 years and had been a chief accountant for 30 and who understood the structure of Redstone Holdings more completely than Callum had understood or had chosen to understand that she might. He sat in the chair by his mother's window in the room he had signed her into and had not returned to, and he listened to her explain the financial reality of the company he had built, and somewhere in the middle of the explanation, he stopped being the man who had come to get a signature. He started being the son who had never truly looked at his mother. The gold pen was in her hands. She had not uncapped it. Miriam set the gold pen down. She set it on the small table beside the green tin with the deliberate placement of someone who is done with one thing and is about to begin another, and she folded her hands in her lap and looked at Callum with the expression of a woman who had been thinking about this moment for 6 months and had arrived at it knowing precisely what she wanted to say. She said, "I'm going to sign the documents, Callum." She let that sit for a moment. She said, "But I have conditions, not legal conditions, personal ones." She said, "And I want you to hear them before I uncap the pen." Callum looked at her. She said, "You will call me." "Not the front desk, my room directly, this number." She indicated the phone on the nightstand with a gesture that was not dramatic, but was specific, the gesture of someone pointing to an object that has a function. She said, "Every Sunday. Not for 10 minutes. For as long as it takes." She said, "Your father called me every Sunday from a job site in 1987. He was in the middle of a highway overpass 5 months of Sundays on a construction site with limited equipment and unpredictable weather. He still called." She said it without the weight of accusation, as a description of what Sunday calling looked like in a person who intended it. Callum was quiet. She said, "Condition 2. You will read the monthly shareholder summaries from Gerald's office, starting with the next one." She said, "Not because you are legally required to, though you are, because a person who owns something should understand what they own." She looked at him. "And because I would like someone to discuss them with. I have been reading them alone for 18 months, and the analysis is better when there is someone to talk to." She said this the way she said most things that were true plainly and without the architecture of complaint around them, as a statement of a fact and an expression of a preference that the fact could change. Callum looked at the tin. She said, "And the third thing." She said, "I want you to come back here." She said it, and then she was quiet for a moment, the particular quiet of someone who has said the sentence they most wanted to say and is allowing it to exist in the room without immediately filling the space around it. She said, "Not today and not next week. In a month on a Sunday with no documents and no portfolio. Come and sit in the common room with me. Meet Beatrice. She is a terrible card player, and she is very good company, and she has been a better neighbor to me in 14 months than—" She stopped. She said, "Come and eat the Thursday chicken with me. It is genuinely not good, and I eat it every Thursday, and it would be better with someone to complain about it with." She did not frame it as punishment. She framed it as invitation, the way she framed most things that were important, as an opening rather than a closing, as a door she was holding rather than a door she was locking. Callum looked at the window. He said, "That's it." His voice was different from the voice he had come in with, the prepared, confident voice of a man who had rehearsed this visit. He said, "Those are the conditions." Miriam said, "Yes." He said, "I expected—" He stopped. He said, "I don't know, less." Miriam said, "I don't need your money, Callum." She said it without sharpness, as a simple statement of arithmetic. She said, "I have 40% of a $9 million company. The distribution from this sale will cover my care at Meadowview and its successor facilities for the remainder of my life, and leave a remainder besides." She said, "I don't need your money." She looked at him. She said, "I need my son." The room held this. Callum was quiet for a long time. He looked at Bernard's photograph on the nightstand, Bernard at the fishing pier in 1987. Bernard squinting into the sun with the expression of a man who was happy, in a way he was not performing. He looked at the photograph with the attention of someone who has just been given a reason to look at something that has been in front of them and has been looked past. Then he looked at his mother. He said, "I'm sorry I didn't come." He said it quietly, the way true apologies are said when they are true, without the architecture of justification that most apologies carried without the because, and the I thought, and the I told myself. He said the sentence that was the actual sentence, the short one, the one that had been waiting under all the other sentences for 18 months. Miriam received it without ceremony. She said, "I know you are." She said it the way she said true things she had been waiting to say, with the plain acknowledgement of something that did not require elaboration. She reached to the small table. She picked up the gold pen. She held it for a moment with both hands, the pen Bernard had given her in 1989, with the inscription on the barrel she had read so many times. She no longer needed to look at it to Miriam, who always reads before she signs, and she felt the familiar weight of it, the weight of a thing that had been used for 35 years, of documents that mattered every contract she had ever signed as chief accountant, the closing papers on the house, Bernard's documents at the end, when the documents at the end were the ones that needed to be signed. She uncapped it. She drew the acquisition document toward her on the table, the co-owner signature page, the line highlighted in yellow with her name printed below it. She signed. She signed slowly with the full, deliberate signature she used for documents of consequence, the complete name, rather than the shorthand she used for routine correspondence, the signature of a woman who understood that a signature was the record of a presence and was being present fully for what she was agreeing to. The gold pen moved across the line. She finished. She recapped the pen with the small, definitive sound of a cap closing on something complete. She placed it beside the green tin. She folded her hands. She had signed it. Not because she had to. She had been entirely within her rights to decline indefinitely, and the law would have supported her in that declining. She had signed it because her conditions had nothing to do with the money, and the money had nothing to do with what she needed. She needed Sunday phone calls. She needed someone to read the shareholder summaries with. She needed a son who would eat the Thursday chicken and complain about it beside her. Bernard's pen had signed the deal, and what came next would be determined by whether Callum could answer the question she had asked him about the word comfortable. The pen was recapped. The tin was on the table. The document was signed. Callum came home at 6:15. Priya was at the counter in the kitchen in the routine of dinner preparation that had the particular quality of the end of a Thursday, the familiar sequence of a weekday evening in a house that ran on schedule. She looked up when he came in, and she read his face the way she had been reading it for 17 years, with the accuracy of a woman who had learned the specific vocabulary of her husband's expressions, what each configuration of his mouth and eyes and the set of his shoulders communicated. She said she signed. Callum said she signed. Priya exhaled the breath of a woman releasing something she had been holding for the length of time it had taken Callum to drive to Meadowview and come back. Then she looked at his face more carefully, at the thing that was in it that was not the relief she had expected, and was something more complicated than relief. She said what happened in there. Callum sat at the kitchen table. He told it in order from the receptionist saying she's expecting you to the green tin on the bed to the letters fanned on the table, and Priya listened with the dish still in her hands, the dinner preparation suspended her full attention on what he was saying, rather than on the task she had been performing. She said she's been getting the shareholder summaries the whole time. Callum said since day one, since the drive over. She called Gerald from the car. Priya was quiet. She said she knew about the acquisition before you called her. Callum said 6 months before. The first inquiry was month 8. She had been tracking it for 6 months before I walked through that door. Priya set the dish on the counter. She said, what did she ask for? The conditions, Callum told her. He told her the Sunday calls, not the front desk, but the room directly for as long as it takes. He told her the shareholder summaries read together discussed. He told her the visit with no portfolio, the common room, Beatrice, the Thursday chicken. Priya listened to each condition. When he finished, she stood at the counter in the silence of someone whose internal accounting of a situation has just been revised, the particular stillness of a woman who has received information that reorganizes something she thought she understood. She said I was the one who found Meadowview. She said it without the defensive framing of someone protecting a position as a plain statement of her role. She said I was the one who said it was the right solution. I researched it. I compared it to 4 other facilities. I highlighted the amenities. Callum said, I know. Priya said I believed it. A pause. I still believe it was the right facility. She said I'm not sure anymore that we put her there for the right reasons. The kitchen was quiet. Callum said she said something about the word comfortable. She asked whether comfortable was a description or a substitute. Priya looked at him. She understood it immediately the way certain things are understood immediately when they arrive in the right language at the right moment. She pulled out the chair across from Callum and sat down at the kitchen table, the dinner still unfinished on the counter. She said we made her comfortable so we didn't have to be present. She said it without the inflection of a question because it was not a question. Callum said yes. Priya said that's not the same thing. Callum said no. She made sure I understood that. They sat at the kitchen table in the quiet of a house that was full of the evidence of a life, organized around competence, the good kitchen, and the scheduled dinners and the children's activities managed, and the care facility researched, and the amenities highlighted, everything arranged correctly, everything done well, and the particular thing that had not been done sitting between them on the table with the complete quiet of something that had been absent for 18 months and was now finally present in the room. Priya picked up her phone. She looked at it for a moment at the screen with its notifications and its contacts, and the particular way a phone represented the connections a person maintained or did not maintain. She put it down. She looked at Callum. She said, I'd like to meet Beatrice. Callum said the roommate. Priya said the friend. She said the woman who has been your mother's friend for over a year while we weren't there. She picked up the phone again. She did not call Miriam's room. She called Meadowview's direct line and asked for a day's, whose name Callum had mentioned the nurse who had been there for 14 months of mornings and who had delivered the monthly letters without asking questions. Adia's answered. Priya introduced herself. She said, I'm Callum Holt's wife, Miriam Holt's daughter-in-law. She said, I wanted to ask you something. Is there anything that Miriam needs that she hasn't asked for? Anything she's mentioned wanting, or that you've noticed she might want that she hasn't said directly? There was a brief pause on the other end. Adaiz said she never asked for anything, Mrs. Holt. Priya said, I know. That's what I'm calling about. She said it quietly, the way you say something when you have just understood the shape of a problem well enough to begin addressing it the first sentence of a different approach. After the call, she sat at the table with the phone in her hands and Callum across from her and the portfolio on the counter where he had set it when he came and the signed documents inside it. Miriam's signature on the co-owner line made with Bernard's gold pen in room 14B of Meadowview Nursing Facility. Priya had always meant well. She had found the best facility and arranged the best care and told herself the best story about what she was doing and why. What she had not done was call. What she had not done was ask what was needed rather than arrange what seemed sufficient. She understood the difference between those two things now. The kitchen was the same kitchen. The table was the same table. She was not the same woman who had highlighted the amenities page. Sunday, 10 o'clock in the morning. Miriam was in the chair by the window with her book when the phone rang. Not the common line at the nurse's station, not the facility's general number. Her room phone, the direct number that was on a small card in Gerald's files, and in Callum's phone, and in almost no one else's, the number that rang so infrequently that the sound of it had a particular quality, the quality of something that was being used for the specific purpose it existed for, rather than as a default. She picked it up on the second ring. She said, hello, Callum. He said, good morning, Mom. There was a pause on his end, the pause of a man who had picked up the phone and dialed and was now in the call and had arrived without the preparation he usually brought to things. He said, I'm not sure what to. He said, I didn't prepare anything. Miriam said, good. I don't want prepared. I want you. The call began. Callum told her about the week. He told it the way he had talked in room 14B after the green tin was open without the performance of a son managing information for a parent he had decided required management, just the account of a week as it had actually been. The deal was moving through its final stages, the legal review proceeding on schedule, a minor contractor issue on a separate project that was more irritating than serious. Something Priya was working on, a thing she had decided to do that he did not fully understand yet, but that seemed right to him. Miriam listened. She asked one question about the contractor issue, a specific question about the contract terms that would govern the resolution, the question of someone who understood how these things worked and was interested in the actual mechanics rather than the surface of the situation. Callum answered it and then paused. He said that's exactly the right question. Miriam said it usually is. She told him about Meadowview's week. She told him about Beatrice's niece who had visited on Wednesday and had brought a plant that was too large for the room and that Beatrice had installed in the common room to general approval. She told him about the argument on Thursday afternoon over the television in the common room, a disagreement about programming preferences that had involved more people and more volume than the subject warranted. She told him the Thursday chicken had been marginally better than usual, which she attributed to a change in the preparation rather than the recipe. Callum laughed. It was the laugh from room 14B, the actual one, rather than the social one, the laugh of a man who finds something genuinely funny and is not thinking about the impression the laugh makes. He said, I looked at the shareholder summary Gerald sent, the most recent one. Miriam said, and he said I had questions. She said, ask them. They spent 15 minutes on the financial structure of the remaining post-sale obligations, the distribution timeline, and the tax treatment of the co-owner distribution, and the question of whether the retained interest clause had implications for the non-compete provisions in the acquisition agreement. Callum asked the questions of a man who was reading carefully and had found the places where his reading had produced uncertainty. Miriam answered them with the precision of a woman who had been reading this kind of document for 30 years and had read this specific document 18 times. She guided and he asked, and neither of them performed anything. It was the conversation that should have happened in 2017, before the signatures, before the intake forms, before the 18 months of monthly letters to a room he had not visited. It was happening now on a Sunday morning in March, over a telephone between a kitchen in the suburbs and a window in room 14B, and it was the correct conversation at the correct time. Near the end of the call, Callum said, Mom. The tin. She said, yes. He said, do you still need it? Now that Miriam said I emptied it. He said, where are the letters? She said, filed. Gerald's office. You'll receive copies as part of the final closing documents. Standard procedure for the co-owner records. A pause. She said the tin itself I kept. It's a good tin. She said it the way she said things that were simply true, without elaboration. The plain statement of a fact about an object that had earned its place on the windowsill where she had put it, after emptying it, cleaned and sitting in the morning light, like something that had completed its purpose, and had not needed to be discarded because it was still a good tin. Callum said I'll come in 3 weeks, the Sunday with no agenda. Miriam said I'll tell Beatrice. He said, is she as bad at cards as you described? Miriam said worse. You'll like her immediately. The call ended. Miriam sat for a moment with the phone in her lap in the chair by the window in the morning light that came through at the angle she had come to know over 18 months of mornings, the particular light of a west-facing room at 10 o'clock on a Sunday in early spring. She looked at the green tin on the windowsill, empty, cleaned. The lid sitting slightly open, not as a statement, but because there was no longer anything inside that needed the lid pressed shut, no content that needed to stay sealed until the correct moment, because the correct moment had arrived and been used and was now the past. She had put it on the windowsill after emptying it because it was a good tin, and she had nowhere to put things that were good and finished and ought to be kept. She picked up Bernard's photograph. She said he called Bernard, without prompting. On the right phone. She said he's going to learn how to read the summaries. I'm going to teach him. She set the photograph back in its position. She said you would have liked that. She opened her book. She never moved out of room 14B. She liked the window, and she liked Beatrice, and she liked that the Thursday chicken gave her something real to talk about on Sunday mornings when the phone rang on the direct line at 10 o'clock. The $9 million deal closed 3 weeks later. Her 40% arrived as numbers arrived quietly and completely transferred and confirmed and settled into the accounts Gerald managed on her behalf. She put none of it in a tin. She did not need to track it. The tracking had been the instrument of a period that was finished, the period of monthly letters and closed lids, and a green tin full of evidence she might or might not need. She did not need it anymore. The only thing she had ever needed to track was her son, and now she had him on Sunday mornings unprepared and asking the right questions about contractor clauses and post-sale obligations and the structure of things he should have asked about years ago. The signature had cost her nothing. The conditions had given her everything. The green tin sat on the windowsill in the morning light. Empty, clean, finished, and kept. Because it was a good tin, and because some objects earned the right to stay even after they had done their work.